Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But let's begin with the biggie, okay? Students have been warned that the boycotts of Israel and divestment that some student unions have undertaken could be breaking the law. The Charity Commission is looking at the 17 student unions, including some of the largest, that have passed motions backing a boycott of goods as well as divestment in Israeli companies with any connection to the military or to human rights abuses. You'll be aware of the protests at the School of Oriental and African Studies here in London yesterday in protest at a speech or a visit being undertaken by the Israeli ambassador Mark Regev.
Now, the Charity Commission is investigating concerns about 17 students' unions that campaign for a boycott of Israel. Support for the BDS movement has been growing on British campuses, but critics accuse it of fueling anti-Semitism and attacks against Jewish students. John Ironmonger has this exclusive story.
No one protected us. No one was there to keep us safe. No one was there for the aftermath of it. No one asked if we were okay.
People breaking in through windows, banging on the doors. I thought I was in the middle of a war between pro-Israeli students and pro-Palestinian students.
It's probably fair to say that students are among the most politically engaged people in society. They're known for having strong opinions, for standing together on things like climate change, tuition fees, and civil rights. But there's one subject that ignites students and bitterly divides them, and that is Israel.
The Jewish state of Israel is deeply controversial, accused of wide-ranging human rights abuses against the Palestinian people and provoking anger around the world.
So when you have these sort of situations...
We've heard from Jewish students here who claim they've become scapegoats for anti-Israel hostility, subjected to verbal harassment, even physical attacks. And we've found that some student bodies are now being investigated for ignoring a legal duty to protect them. Devorah Caffey goes to Queen Mary University in London. She says she's been targeted time and again for having a connection with Israel.
Have you ever taken any of these attacks personally?
100%. You know, it's not about political opinions anymore. It's more about if I ever express a viewpoint in class or on social media, I get comments, you know, in public or in private saying, you know, oh, that's a Jewish girl, and pointing behind my back and whispering.
She says the abuse turned physical at UCL in October when she attended a speech given by a former officer in the Israel Defense Force.
This one girl used her back and pushed me against the doors, and I was screaming for her to get off me. My friend helped me get out of the crowd because I felt very claustrophobic. And outside, I had a panic attack, and I couldn't breathe. I felt like my chest was kind of tightening up.
The event was hijacked by pro-Palestinian students who claimed the speaker was complicit in human rights abuses. It was eventually moved to a secret location.
We were running towards the room, and my friends got inside. I saw protesters running around campus trying to look for us. And one of my friends had a Jewish skull cap, and I was about to tell him to take it off. And I felt really disgusted in myself that thought would even come to my head.
So you felt then that you had to shield your identity?
Yeah, no, definitely. And it just, you know, my grandparents were refugees. They left Afghanistan because they were Jewish. And yet here I am, you know, as a proud Jewish student in the modern age, you know, at UCL, and I still had to do this.
Police were called to prevent further clashes and the event was able to proceed, but footage we've obtained shows protesters shouting shame at Jewish students as they left the venue.
How has this sort of thing affected your everyday life at university?
It has been hard. It's been 2 years of just, I guess, constant fighting for our freedom of speech, our rights, our well-being. I've definitely missed a lot of deadlines, for example. I've got a few extensions. I've had counseling. I've had a few anxiety episodes where it's been really hard.
Not all Jewish students share the same views. Cy Englert is a member of the Palestine Society at SOAS.
There's this kind of image that, the Palestine Society is running wild, that it's very dangerous for Jewish students, etc. And that is something that I don't recognize at all. When there are cases of unfair harassment, if there's cases of racism, I actually think the Palestine movement and its organizations and its kind of official representatives and cadres, etc., is actually very careful to acknowledge that, to condemn it, to distance itself from it.
Antisemitism at British universities has doubled, according to one charity. Incidents like Nazi graffiti, abuse and assaults increased from 21 in 2015 to 41 last year. But we've heard claims the bodies which represent students are part of the problem. Students' unions, in increasing numbers, have been voting to adopt strict anti-Israel policies under the banner of a global movement called BDS, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions. SOAS Students' Union in London has been leading the charge. In 2015, they held a BDS referendum.
Why are we allowing Israel in the 21st century to get away with this crime?
It's about ending Israeli impunity and ending complicity of those institutes and bodies, etc., that we might be a part of that are also complicit. It's about ending our own complicity too.
BDS pressures Israel to end the occupation of Arab lands by calling for the boycott of Israeli companies and institutions.
I think SOAS, in a lot of ways, is a beacon, actually, for a lot of other universities.
It's so important that we lead this movement.
Since the referendum at SOAS, many more students' unions have signed up to the movement. But some people claim that BDS is threatening the welfare of Jewish students.
So student unions talk a lot about safe space. And I think a space which is sort of specifically, explicitly boycotting of Israel is not a safe space for Israeli students or for many other students who have various kinds of links to Israel, or for other students who simply are worried by the politics of the singling out of Israel as a specific, unique evil on the planet.
So do you think these student unions in question may be in danger of alienating their members that are Jewish?
I think it's profoundly alienating for most Jewish students. Most Jewish students have, as part of their Jewish identity, some kind of attachment or relationship to Israel.
In total, we found 17 students' unions that have endorsed BDS, and they include some of the largest in the UK, like Manchester and UCL. But are they doing anything wrong? Since 2010, students' unions have become registered charities, and this means they now have a legal duty to act in the interests of their members. Political campaigns must not become their focus, and they're not allowed to comment publicly on issues that don't affect the welfare of their members as students.
We raised these findings, and the Charity Commission has confirmed it is now examining concerns about the involvement of a number of students' union charities in the BDS movement. It said the concerns would be assessed consistently while taking into account the circumstances of each individual charity, and that where appropriate, they may need to take regulatory action.
I went to a Queen Mary event, an event at Queen Mary, talking about BDS and so on. With a couple of friends. There was a lot of hate speech going on, basically, against Israel. As soon as we started asking questions, they started saying, "You're sent by the embassy," and everyone started kind of booing at us. "You're Mossad agents. Your state is a fantasy world for Jews." It's all horrible. And then next to us was a guy sitting, and he started saying very kind of intimidating stuff towards the girls that were with me, sexist stuff. And as we left the event, we saw that we were being followed by this guy, and we had to run to the station because we'd heard about this guy being particularly hostile. I just thought, like, this is not how I'm supposed to be feeling, because I've asked questions during a debate at university.
What's fueling this anti-Semitism, if you like, on campus?
I think when institutions accept BDS, when the student union accepts BDS, when the National Union of Students accepts BDS, when you have your own professors signing petitions to boycott Israel, when you see the pro-Palestinian cause kind of twist into an anti-Israel cause, and that's the whole problem with the rhetoric being used. It's not pro-Palestinian, it's anti-Israel. When you see that happening, you understand this is what's fueling anti-Semitism.
Isaac isn't alone. The NUS, which is a confederation of 600 students' unions, held a survey this month of their Jewish members. The vast majority of respondents felt uncomfortable with their students' union having a BDS policy. But the NUS themselves backed BDS in 2015. They refused to be interviewed for this programme and failed to provide us with a statement. Our request for comment from the BDS National Committee was also declined. And of the students' unions we contacted that have passed boycott motions, only SOAS was prepared to talk to us.
The idea that somehow supporting BDS, supporting boycott, academic boycott, etc., is a kind of a blank boycott on individuals, I think is very dangerous. It's not. It's about saying we don't want institutional links, economic links, political links with institutions, governments, companies that are complicit in the attacks on rights. The BDS movement that proposes referenda, it doesn't propose to shut down any political event. On the contrary, it proposes to open them, to involve as many people as possible. Everybody, whatever their background and ideas, should be allowed to be involved in the union and take part in them. Now, that shouldn't stop us from making decisions and from overturning those decisions. It's
decisions that
possible.
Alienate certain students?
I think all decisions, I mean, national elections alienate everybody that votes for the losing part.
But the government isn't a charity, though.
Sure, and then maybe there's a question about whether students' unions should be charities.
I think when student unions encompass this one-sided view, it's kind of expressing to everyone as a fact that, you know, Israelis are in the wrong, they're the enemy of human rights in the world, they're an enemy to peace in the region. If you look behind the BDS lens, they call for these things that are not peaceful, they harm Jewish students and pro-Israel students, and they don't support a peaceful atmosphere on campus.
You know that the Labour Party remains riven with claim and counterclaim. My former colleague Ken Livingstone's career has in many ways been, well, it's come to a very undignified conclusion as a result of absolutely outrageous comments he's made about Hitler and the Holocaust and Jewish people and Israel. And the Liberal Democrats this week is almost a full house. All we need is a Tory to stand accused of anti-Semitism, and we've got the hat-trick. The Liberal Democrats this week have had their own local difficulty with the dismissal of a candidate who, I mean, just said the Jews. As far as I can tell, the crime of the Liberal Democrat candidate was to say the Jews instead of Israel, and it's quite right that he would be punished for that. It's a ludicrous conflation of one country's foreign policy with people of disparate and multiple views who live in practically every corner of the planet. And I'm ready, okay? So bring it on. If I upset you or offend you, I am a grown-up, and you can't have difficult conversations without provoking difficult responses. I think of all the things that I've learned since I was given the privilege of spending time with you every morning, this is the subject I have found most difficult, most troubling, most challenging. The very first time we talked about it, and I also have to remind you that I'm not an expert on this, and a lot of people who are passionate of defenders of Israel are experts. So you already have a kind of gulf of understanding, a gulf of knowledge. So I can't precisely remember which campaign it was that drew me to talk about this for the very first time. But it was a bombing campaign that was subsequently, I think, described by the Knesset in quite negative terms. Bad things were done. And that, to me, made a mockery of any claim that to criticize Israeli foreign policy is in any way anti-Semitic. And yet that conflation is up and running. You know that it is. It's a silly conflation. But what I've been doing over the last few years, off-air, is trying to work out why. And events of the last 18 months, 2 years or so, have, I think, provided me with an answer. And I want to run it by you, because we've spent a lot of time together now, and we've had a lot of conversations, and some of them have touched on these issues. But I just want to know what you think about my theory. That's all. I hope that doesn't sound self-important. When you see the rise, as we are, of carpet-slippered fascism, and you see the targets, the traditional targets, it reminds you that some of the atrocities of the past are still with us. They're not, if you like, things that were undertaken by a different species. For me, it was a visit to the Anne Frank Museum in Amsterdam that really brought this home. I'd always seen, almost as if they were a hinterland between fact and fiction, and some of the stuff that went on in the past, even the not too distant past, always felt to me as if it had been undertaken by a different species. It wasn't humans. It wasn't people like my neighbours or my colleagues or my friends that had been complicit in the Holocaust. It wasn't people who you might have broken bread with a week ago who were phoning the authorities to dob you in a week later. It was almost as if I had this comforting notion that the kind of people who did stuff like that were spottable. You know, you could see them, you could identify them. Anyone who might have fascistic leanings, anybody who might have a tendency to be brainwashed into hating their neighbour for utterly spurious reasons. I always thought it was a million miles away from my world, and I realised today that it isn't. And I suspect, and I'm going to need help from Jewish people on this in particular, I suspect that for Jewish people, that is an almost silly observation. It is so blindingly obvious to you that the tidal waves of ancient hatred are only ever inches from your door, that the foundation of the State of Israel has become the symbolic and actual, both mental and physical, intellectual, emotional and political bulwark against those tides of hatred. Jewish people have been persecuted on a scale that no other people have on this planet historically. And historically is a crucial word there, because there have been instances of persecution of other people. The Roma in particular during the Holocaust suffered on a scale that is, I think, criminally overlooked by history. The word that the Roma people use is not Holocaust. They have a word, I'm going to forget it now, aren't I? Parasmos is the word that Roma use, which translates loosely as the devouring. Because the percentage of Roma people murdered by the Nazis is actually a higher percentage of the total than Jewish people. The number is considerably smaller, but as a percentage of the total, it's high. But Jewish people have lived pretty much for 2,000 years with a constant threat of persecution, whether it be a pogrom, whether it be an exodus, whether people are getting thrown out of their homes or thrown out of countries, whether they're getting their business premises set on fire, whether they're having bricks thrown through their windows, or whether they're being rounded up for gas chambers, or merely victims of verbal abuse. Jewish people, because of history and religion, have suffered astonishingly over the years, and I think Israel, correct me if I'm wrong, is so much more than a country. Israel is the protection. And that's why for many Jewish people, Israel can't do anything wrong, because what it represents and what it provides for Jewish people is so immense and so powerful and so important that you can almost blind yourself to any ills at all that she may commit, because the greater good is being served. The protection of Jewish people, a place of sanctuary on this planet for the first time since the Old Testament, exists. It hasn't even existed for 100 years yet, but it exists, and therefore absolutely everything must be done to protect it, which includes being blind to criticism, and perhaps includes excessive, if you will, defense of the realm. And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand. So I have stared and stared and stared at anti-Semitism in Israel for years now, trying to unpick why people behave in the way that they do, and why the gulf of understanding is so huge. Because these are not bad people that turn up at SOAS to protest, and these are not bad people that turn up to protest about the protests. They're people who have a lot more in common than separates them. But the difference, I think, is that they're almost playing on different pitches. So when people object to Israel's foreign policy, when they object to Israel's treatment of the Palestinian people, when they object to the illegal occupation of territories, they're holding Israel to an objective international standard that other countries are held to. If I was a Jew, I don't know which way I'd swing on this. I know there's a hell of a lot of Jews who've got profound problems with Israeli foreign policy. But if I think the more close the Holocaust feels, the easier it would be to forgive anything, actually, on the part of the country, because it represents our sanctuary. And that, I think, is what the rest of us don't quite get. Does that make sense? 0345 6060 973. I look at the way that Muslims are being demonized and treated today, and for the first time in my life, I get an inkling of what it must have felt like in Germany in the 1930s, where something over which you had no control at all was being used to both separate and penalize you. And if you're Jewish, you grow up with that, right? I never got it. I got to be honest with you, because I never encountered anti-Semitism, weirdly, until I came to work at LBC. I didn't have that many Jewish friends until I went to live in Manchester for a year after leaving school. I didn't even know it was a big thing. You know, Catholic school, we know what Judaism is. We know about the split during the life of Jesus and some of the historical legacy of that, but I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't even have a particularly profound understanding of how Israel came into being or why it came into being. The Holocaust was something that we studied in schools. It was something that we looked at in books and photographs that burned themselves into our consciousness. But in the same way that Henry VIII had 6 wives, looking back, it was, you know, it was something you studied in class. And the more I've tried to understand why people seem to have what's the word I'm looking for? A blind spot. The more I've understood that it's not a blind spot at all. It's actually the opposite. It's a knowledge of what people can do to Jews. And once you take on board that knowledge of what people can do to Jews, you can understand why so many people see Israel as beyond reproach, whatever she does. Things that have stuck in my craw recently, odd things actually, not necessarily the most obvious offences. The footage I saw of a barbecue being held outside a prison where Palestinian prisoners are on hunger strike, so that the smells of the cooking meat would waft into the prison. Stuff like that, you look at that and you think that's barbaric, but then you sort of think, well, hang on a minute. For them, every single thing they do is in defence of this sanctuary, in defence of this realm. And once you get your head around that, you have to change the nature of the conversation, I think, if you want to ever make criticism of Israel's foreign policy. I just want to know what you think about that. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. When anti-Semitism accusations are thrown around, when protests like the one we had in London yesterday at SOAS between people who describe themselves as pro-Palestinian and people who describe themselves as pro-Israeli occur, I think one side's playing football and the other side's playing cricket. And until they find a way of actually engaging on the same field, then the division and the anger and the unhappiness is just going to increase. That's all I've got, okay? And this is tricky for me, but I've put it all out there, and now you can respond. It's 10:17. I don't imagine that we'll make as much progress as we did yesterday when we single-handedly solved the housing crisis, because today we're talking about something rather bigger, older, and more serious, anti-Semitism, and the curious congregation of accusation and offence that has unfolded in recent weeks on both the political and the national stage. Let's go to Hendon. Moshe is there. Moshe, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's a pleasure to speak to you again. Last time we spoke on this subject, we tilted swords quite...
Let's crack on, mate. There's a lot of people waiting.
I don't think that Zionism is about just anti-Semitism. Zionism is the...
I haven't used that word yet.
Right. Well, okay, but Zionism is about the Jewish right to self-determination,
yes,
to live in our ancient homeland, and to assert...
You see, already we're getting controversial. Here's the thing I want to examine. Well, no, it is, because lots of other people would claim it was their ancient homeland as well. But and that's kind of my point, is that what I'm trying to examine through the lens of historical persecution is the idea that these kids with their banners who stand outside student unions and the BDS movement are confused about why Israel is perceived by them and by many and by the United Nations to behave in a way that other countries wouldn't be able to get away with. And
but it's not true.
Yeah, well, that's why I said it is perceived that way.
But it's not true. And the fact is that Israel is held to account on a moral standing far higher than most other countries.
I think the opposite.
Countries that exhibit human rights abuses on a daily basis, such as China, such as Saudi Arabia.
But they don't claim to be Western democracies, do they?
Well, they may not.
So compared to other Western democracies, if I tell you what I think, then you can tell me. If you understand what I think, then you can tell me I'm wrong. It's pretty hard to do it before I've explained. So for me, trying to imagine what it would be like to have lost family in the Holocaust, trying to imagine what it would be like to have grown up in a faith that had been persecuted pretty much forever, as opposed to a faith where, you know, you could go back to when they were burning Catholics, but it doesn't feel very close to home. Israel, to me, would be actually beyond criticism and beyond reproach. I would find it hard to imagine any circumstances in which, because of what she represents, I would find it hard to imagine any circumstances in which I would allow anybody to criticize her in any way. And that's what you sound like.
No, I don't. And I criticize the Israeli government on a regular basis. No, but I'm telling you now, personally, I do not believe that Israel can never do any wrong. And as a Jew who has experienced anti-Semitism living in London, and as someone who's lived in Israel for 5 years, I actually recognize the importance not only of the state of Israel just to protect me from anti-Semitism, but actually that it is my right to live there as a Jew, and therefore part of the indigenous population.
I've overlooked that side of it. That's going to make things a lot trickier than I predicted, because, of course, as I said at the outset, there are plenty of people listening to this program who reject that historical rationale.
I understand that, but the fact is that the Balfour Declaration, which was almost 100 years ago now, also asserted the rights of non-Jewish people living in the land of Israel, and the Israeli government, successive Israeli governments, have attempted to protect those rights, and people living in Israel who are not Jewish have as many rights as Jewish people do as well. The problem is the Palestinian governments successively...
Again, I'm just going to steer you back to the conversation that we're having today, rather than the ones that that are always unfolding on this sort of territory. And if you had to explain to people who reject what you've just... So if you had to prove to people that you do brook criticism, what would you say? What's the worst thing Israel's done recently?
I think that there are policies that exist in the West Bank and Gaza Strip that
specifically
are very troubling. Well, the fact is that they have not dealt with extreme elements in the settler movement properly. I have been critical of that, and I believe that the...
Why not? Why do you think they haven't?
It's a very, very difficult powder keg of political, religious issues, because politics and religion are very interwoven in Israel, and I don't think the government has taken responsibility in reining in.
What would happen if it did?
I think that there would be a backlash within the extreme right settler movement, but that is something that I thought in terms of justice.
I understand that. I thought we'd make progress today, but I completely forgot the geography. I was talking only about religion and politics. The geography is the reason why there's never going to be the kind of breakthrough that people outside the conflict don't really understand why it can't happen, why there can't be a more meaningful two-state solution proposed. But it's the historical claim to the land, isn't it? That's what it's always going to boil down to.
I think you mentioned it briefly in your introduction. I think that having been in this subject for many years, I have sensed that people are speaking two totally different languages.
Yes.
I think there is total misunderstanding on both sides, and I do work very hard. I work a lot in interfaith, and you know, I do work very hard to try and explain.
Except that I think, but I think that you've demonstrated yourself to be part of that process while you're setting yourself up, offering yourself up as a solution to it. And I mean, we could both be right, I suppose.
I'm speaking.
But that geographical claim, that's the thing that's the thing that can never get resolved, isn't it?
No, and the problem is it can't get resolved. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
I don't think it can be resolved. The best case scenario is to find some sort of two-state solution, which is what the vast majority of the Jewish community that I certainly have any connection to, and anyone that I can have a connection to in Israel, believes in and continues to believe in.
But it doesn't seem to be what Benjamin Netanyahu wants, or what Likud is moving the country towards.
Well, his stance is to sort of keep the status quo, because at the moment the status quo is better than anything else. But I genuinely think that's because he does not believe there are partners for peace, that the Palestinians have not moved in the same direction as Israelis have in working towards a two-state solution. So I think it's a policy thing.
This is a big if, and we're both grown-ups, so you'll understand it's not in any way trivializing anything. But if the Holocaust hadn't happened, would Zionism be very different from how it is today?
I don't think it would.
See, I really think it would. As an outsider looking in,
let me
please do.
Give you some historical context.
Briefly, because we're very nearly out of time.
The Balfour Declaration was, in fact, by Lord Balfour, who recognised the scourge of anti-Semitism long before the Holocaust had happened. This was 1917.
No, I understand that, but I mean more the emotional nature of Zionism, because this was my big breakthrough over the last couple of years, was thinking, well, if that was my people, I would also be blindly passionate in my defence of that country.
No, I think the Holocaust has certainly coloured the experience of being Jewish, and it will continue to for the rest of existence. I don't think that people blindly support the state of Israel because the Holocaust happened and it's there to protect them. I was 2 blocks away from a terrorist atrocity and experienced anti-Semitism within Israel while I was living in Jerusalem. So we're not protected just because of the state.
No, it's not. I'm not saying exclusively because of that. And we can disagree in a respectful fashion on that. As an outsider who is grimly fascinated by these matters and had no idea actually until I went into this branch of journalism, just how influential this conflict, this historical conflict, is on the rest of the world affairs. For me, it helps me understand a position that I otherwise find intractable, to think that the lens of the Holocaust defines a lot of support of Israel by Jewish people and their friends around the world. You disagree, which is fine, and I suppose it's the nature of conversation. Thank you for ringing in. Phones have gone nuts, inevitably, and it's unlikely I'm going to be able to speak to everybody, but I'm not going to do this in sound bites. Moshe's had the whole of that section. I'm not going to necessarily give everybody else quite so much time, but I want to learn from you as much as I want you to talk to me today. And for me, although Moshe disagrees, the only way I can make sense of some of the scenes I've seen and things that I've read, the only way I can make sense of it is by seeing Israel as being a product of post-Holocaust thinking. Even though it existed before the Holocaust, the support and the almost, what do I say? Yeah, okay, the blindly passionate support and defence only makes sense to me when I think of it like that. But of course, if I'd been raised a Jew, maybe I'd have a legacy of historical persecution that stretched way beyond the 1930s. 0345 6060. I don't know why I'm giving you the number. You won't get through. It's 10:30. I don't find James's argument logical so far. He seems to be attempting to justify a blinkered extreme form of nationalism that one's country can do no wrong. No, I'm trying to understand people who feel that way. It's my fault if it hasn't been clear. Paul in Watford, however, understands and puts it rather better than I've managed to do myself. He writes, speaking as a Jew myself, what my co-religionists completely forget is that Israel is a country like any other and has lurched well to the right, following its relatively socialist beginnings. Many continue to outright defend Israel when they wouldn't perhaps accept the same hard right swing in Britain or elsewhere. That's Paul's opinion. I happen to share that. And my explanation this morning for the why of that observation is perhaps a little simplistic, almost certainly a little simplistic, but if you feel the proximity of persecution and murder on the scale that we saw in the 1930s and 40s, and you know that the target is written on you the moment you're born, then that, as he would describe it, that ability to outright defend something that you wouldn't defend in other circumstances becomes for me a lot easier to understand, and that's all I'm trying to do, understand a position that I have previously found intractable and borderline incomprehensible. Back to the crikey, back to the even more serious territory, considerably more serious territory of I'll just read you something before we talk to Gideon, who is the chairman of the campaign against anti-Semitism and has rung in. Katie in Edgware writes, your family and mine are pretty identical, socioeconomically, cherishing marriage, focused on education, but I bet you've never discussed with your wife when you'll know that it's time to run and where you'll go. We have, and every family I know has. The only option for us is Israel, and we are fortunate enough that we own property there. There is nowhere else. I don't particularly want to live there, and I'm happy here at the moment, and I don't agree with Netanyahu. But to be honest, we'll do whatever it takes for Israel to exist, because it might be the only place I can go with my family and 3 kids. Katie and Paul, thank you so much for getting in touch with me and just offering some crumbs of support to my reluctant but sincere analysis of this situation. That's the bit that the rest of us don't get. That's the bit that allows you, perhaps, to switch off a moral compass that would otherwise be spinning furiously with regard to that homeland as a place of refuge. And the certain, that's why Holocaust denial is such an intrinsic part of anti-Israeli sentiment. Because if you can deny the Holocaust, you can deny the necessity of that sanctuary, which is why any form of Holocaust revisionism that Marine Le Pen indulges in, or Holocaust dilution that Ken Livingstone has stood accused of, I personally think rightly, or Holocaust denial, which is sadly rearing its ugly head again in parts of Donald Trump's core support, is so insidious. And it helps me understand when I hear these things. Gideon Falter is, well, you tell me who you are, Gideon.
Good morning, James. I'm chairman of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism.
Okay, well, why have you rung in today?
Well, I'd like to try and help you make a distinction, if that's okay.
Of course.
The definition of anti-Semitism, which has now been adopted by the British government, which we were a part of, and which has been very vigorously pursued by a lot of Jewish organisations and people, contains within one line, which says criticism of Israel similar to that levelled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic.
Yes.
And I think that's absolutely key here. There are people who say that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. And
there are quite a lot, and they're very well organised, and they know exactly what they're doing.
That's where I'd like to disagree with you. There are people.
You'll have to come and look at my inbox, bro.
That's fine. But if you look at my inbox on the other side, I can assure you there are a hell of a lot more who.
But I'm not telling you. I'm not telling you you're wrong.
But the thing that's critical is there are people who think that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic per se, and they're wrong. Just like there are people who think that criticism of Britain is unpatriotic, yes, and they're wrong too. You'll get that in any national argument. The key thing here is that the vast majority of the Jewish community, I think, will have been listening to the conversation you've been having, and where you were, I think it was Moshe, where you were taking him to task on various things with matters of Israeli policy, and they'll be quite comfortable with that. It's absolutely fine. There's not a drop of anti-Semitism in it. You're discussing a national policy. Fine. The problem that we've got, and if we go to the thing that was at SOAS last night, there was this demonstration. The Israeli ambassador's coming to speak. I believe in free speech. Let him speak. A bunch of people wanted to protest against that.
Just to clarify one thing, free speech also admits the people who say that he shouldn't be allowed to speak, oddly, somewhat conversely.
People who want to stand outside and protest against it, they've got a point they want to make. Let them make the point. The problem is the way that point is made.
Yes.
And I think this really comes down to, we worked a lot with the BBC on the piece that has generated this debate today about the Charity Commission looking into the BDS movement. The complaint that went in to the Charity Commission, I'm just looking at it now, about a third of it is quoting stuff that I've said to them.
Yes.
The crucial thing, you look at these protests last night. There was one protester who started telling Jewish students that all of the Jews who went to their deaths in the gas chambers, the 6 million Jews, were cowards. That's why they died. They just died because they're cowards. That's not criticism of Israel. That's pure
a hate crime.
Anti-Semitism. It's a hate crime. If you look also, now this is a lesser crime if you like, but it goes to the root of it. If you look at what that crowd of people are chanting, probably a lot of them without really thinking about it, they're chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And if you look at the geography, they're calling in that chant for the obliteration of the state of Israel. That's not criticizing a policy. That's telling Jewish people that they shouldn't have a homeland. They shouldn't have a right to self-determination. So that there is not criticism of a state. That there is.
Do you think we're going to run out of time? So briefly on this one, if you would, sure. Gideon, do you think that if the history wasn't so recent, that particular strand of argument would dissolve? The fact that Israel, in its modern form, was entirely man-made within living memory, pretty much. That's why people think
most states actually.
Well, yes, but there it might be redrawing borders and redefining treaties. Israel was sort of dropped, fully formed into the middle of a landmass that was already populated. Do you think if it hadn't been relatively recent, the argument that you could, because it is made, it could be unmade, would not exist?
No, I don't think that. I think that, for example, if you had people standing there saying, we want all Australians driven out, people in Australia...
No, but they wouldn't, because it would sound ridiculous. It's the fact that...
That's what they're saying about Israel.
But it sounds... It's to them, it sounds less ridiculous, because they can point to the not that distant past when it wasn't there.
Yeah, but lots of things weren't there. You know, India and Pakistan weren't there as nation states back then.
No, I don't know that either you're deliberately not understanding me, or I'm not being clear, because there is no comparison there, is there? It's, I mean, you've got partition on the subcontinent, which is the polar opposite, really, of the formation of Israel. And it's because of that word formation that I think perhaps some people reach wrongly for the notion of dissolution or removal. Because it was put there, it could be removed again. I'm just trying to get inside their heads.
I'm trying to get inside their heads, and I look at them saying things like Jews are the successors to the Nazis. The Israelis are now pursuing Nazi policies. To me, that's not a criticism of the state of Israel. That's very deliberately taking the most...
But I'm not going to argue with that at all. I mean, anybody who does will have to come through me. But that's not, to be fair, it's not an answer to the question that I asked, and we're up against the travel news now. Gideon, thank you very much.